Oh, hi there, and welcome to TalkSober.com. Today, on my YouTube channel, we're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to be going through several different books about recovery. I'm going to pick a few books each week, and we're going to go through them, and we're going to talk to you about some of the things that are good, some of the perspectives they have, some of the things that maybe not so good, and some of the things that you can use every day to start to become sober and to stay sober long term. And today what we're doing is we're going through This Naked Mind, Control Alcohol by Anne Grace. And this is an interesting book because it comes from a different perspective. And that perspective is the perspective that alcohol has been ingrained into our minds as part of culture, right? Since the dawn of time, people have been drinking alcohol. It's been a problem back in the days of Bible times, before that even. I think the first instance was probably with like Noah and stuff like that, and maybe even before that. But what she's doing is she's talking about how it's such a big part of our culture that people don't question what it actually is. So what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about this book and talk to you about some of the things that she says and the things that she's questioning. Because in our society here in America and in most developed nations where addiction is a big problem, what you're going to see is that addiction and alcoholism and everything is everywhere. Now, a lot of people, when I went into rehab, they said, you know, I'm here because of this drug or that drug or whatever, but they said that it was going to be harder for the alcoholic because alcohol is everywhere and it's socially acceptable and even encouraged, right? You turn on the TV, you watch a football game, it's everywhere. And that's what Anne is saying in this book, which is a pretty good book, by the way. I enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed the perspective. And here in the introduction, she says a few things on page 18. She says one thing that was pretty important. She says, without desire, there exists no temptation. Right? Without the desire for alcohol, there would be no temptation, there would be no addiction, because desire is the root, right? Desire is the base that everything's hinging on. So what she's doing is she's going on to say, well, where did we get this desire in the first place, and how did it start to get out of hand? She also says that a lot of this stuff is your the rationalizations you use for your drinking, and the decades and decades of unconscious conditioning that you've had from childhood to adulthood and everything like that, where it's been put on you, right? Alcohol and everything has been put on you as something good. You watch the commercials and it's like you're going to live a much better life if you drink, right? That's what they lie and tell us anyway, and that's what Anne's pointing out here. She says that change, on page 20, change often occurs when the pain of the current situation becomes so great that you're willing to change it without fully understanding what the future holds. Now, this was very paramount to my recovery because I was in a world where I didn't know what was going to happen. I was, you know, you guys could look at the story on my YouTube channel here, and if you like these, subscribe and watch all the videos. We do these for you to help you stay sober. And what you're going to see is that with my downfall, right, I had everything going. I had my house, I had my kids, I had my business. Everything was okay, seemingly, except this alcohol part. And when I was at the depths of my quote-unquote rock bottom, if you want to call it that, not a fan of the term, which you'll learn later, but when I was at the depths of the alcoholism, I didn't know what was going to come next. I didn't know if my wife was going to leave me, take the kids. I had sold my house, and I didn't know if it was going to go through. We bought a house across the country. I didn't know if I was going to live there. And I didn't have the certainty. I didn't have the rock to fall on and say, oh, everything's going to be okay. Everyone's going to pat me on the back when I stop drinking. I really had to surrender to the uncertainty, which I believe was paramount to the change. Now, on page 22, and you'll notice that the way she goes through this book in these chapters is she talks about the different liminal points, and she talks about, like, okay, here's the reasons we give ourselves for drinking, here's what the drinker is, here's what the drink is, and here's what I view as sobriety. And she goes on to say on page 23, however, drinking is no longer a fully conscious choice in your life, right? How many of us are at the point or have been at the point where this is not a conscious choice, right? I remember when I was drinking, sometimes I would go and buy alcohol, and it was like I was watching myself. It was like I was going into the place, the gas station. When I got gas, I always got something to drink, and it was like someone above me was pulling the strings and making me order that. Now, I know I fully had the conscious choice to do it, but it's as if I was on autopilot. And that's what she goes on to say, is that, you know, these habits are the things that go on. These habits are shortcuts that your brain takes to make things easier. And when it comes to addiction, this stuff gets a lot worse, and the habits get really, really crazy. And she goes on in page 35. She says, we must be able at any time to accept the fact that we could all be absolutely and utterly wrong. Are you willing to accept the fact that right now, where you are about your addiction and about your life, you could be completely wrong? Or are you so hung up on the bullshit notions of what you think is right and what you think you believe that you're stuck? Right? It's like Werner Erhard used to say, would you rather be right, or would you rather have a life that works for you? And so often people in life are so hung up on being right that they ignore everything else in their life, and they unfortunately end up in an early grave, as I would have. I would have been right on my tombstone. You could have wrote, Marcus was right, but here lies Marcus, right? It's kind of like, that didn't work too good, did it? Another thing she says is, on page 35, repetition is vital to undoing a lifetime of ingrained beliefs. Right? One of the ways we get through this, and not in a self-help, fluffy rainbows and unicorns kind of way, is through affirmations and retraining your brain through repetition. Right? I heard it once said, I forgot who said it, but if I remember, I'll put it on the screen. That if you tell a lie long enough and often enough, and it's outrageous enough, people will believe it as truth eventually. And that's exactly what's going on, right? We have been lied to by alcohol. And Ann is telling us, hey, look, you know, the media companies, the people pushing alcohol, the people pushing booze, they're making a lot of money by lying to you. And unfortunately, those of us who become addicted, because we drink a lot of it, right, are the ones that suffer. And no one's really there to lend a helping hand, but those people are there to sell their alcohol, and that's really what's going on here, and that's what she says. Another thing that I liked on page 47, she says, while I don't agree that alcoholics have lost control due to a physical, mental, or emotional defect, I concur that the alcoholic should be defined as someone who no longer has the ability to restrain their drinking. Right? What is an alcoholic? This is something I see everywhere, where people are hung up on what is an alcoholic? Am I an alcoholic? What does it mean if I'm an alcoholic? And what do I do about it? And so often we have these ingrained beliefs about what an alcoholic is, right? We look at 12-step programs, we look at all these things that say, well, it's a defect in character. Well, it might be, but I think it's something deeper than that, right? If it was a defect in character, then all the hooligans throughout the history would be alcoholics and addicts, right? If that was true, a lot of people I know would be alcoholics and addicts because they have a lot of character defects. But what we want to look at here is, well, repairing character defects is great and it helps a lot of addicts. We want to look at what is the real cause. What is it that we can get to the root of that we can help with? Now, she goes on to say that a lot of the root of addiction stems from a learning disorder, right? And not like a learning disorder like you can't read or something like that, but a learning disorder like you haven't learned something that you need to learn. And personally, I agree with this because I look at my own life and I say, well, you know, alcohol filled the void of coping where I hadn't learned how to cope, right? I hadn't learned how to cope with certain areas of my life. I hadn't learned how to get along in certain areas of my life, and because of that, alcohol came in and it was like, oh, hey, you know what? I get mad. I don't know how to, like, talk to someone without yelling when I'm mad, and I become an asshole when I don't want to do that. Therefore, I'll drink and just shut it off and forget it. And tomorrow when I think of it again, I'll just drink to forget it. And I hadn't learned how to deal with these things. I didn't have a philosophy of life that was going to take me through and say, this is how you live. Page 51, she goes on to say, but most of us hide behind the arbitrary line we have drawn between alcoholics and regular drinking. We don't blame the addictive drug in our glass. Notice she's pointing to alcohol as a drug, which is rightly so. I mean, she goes on to point out that, hey, check it out, the number one ingredient in this alcohol stuff is the same stuff you put in your car, so it's got to be dangerous, right? And she says, we don't blame the addictive drug in our glass. Instead, we believe there's something wrong with the addict on the street. Now, this is a very important point because a lot of people say, well, it's a defect and these certain people have addictive personality and they are ingrained and they will just be addicts no matter what. But there's another school of thought that says, you know, if you drink enough alcohol for a long enough time, you're going to get addicted just because of the chemical makeup of what is in the alcoholic drink. And it's very interesting, right? It's like, okay, well, no one becomes an addict on their first drink. They might like it, but it takes a while to become an addict or an alcoholic. And the reason is because it takes a while for our body to get accustomed to it. And she goes on to say that what's happening in reality is alcohol as a poison is creating withdrawal symptoms. So here you are, you're drinking to get a certain feeling. And when the drink is taken away or you don't have it in your body anymore, it takes like up to 72 hours for it to actually leave your body. I believe that's the number. And once the alcohol is gone and the effects are gone, you have the withdrawal symptom. And no one likes any withdrawal symptom of anything because it just doesn't feel good. And what's happening is we are trying to escape that. And again, when you compile this with learning and all this other stuff, she goes on with little diagrams here. I'll see which camera you can see it in. It looks like this one's going to be the winner. But she goes on to say, you know, here's your reality, and then you have your experiences and observations of reality, which is 1 removed. Then your assumptions about reality, which is twice removed. Your conclusions about reality, which is 3 times removed. Your beliefs, which is 4 times. And then you're standing on this saying, well, this is reality. When in actuality, what your experience is 4 times removed from actual reality, which is very, very interesting. She goes on in page 58 to say the thing about habits is that by definition, they encourage your brain to think less, right? How does a habit work? Well, a habit is like, you know, when you do something, okay? So I go do something and it does it on autopilot, right? I get so accustomed to it that it starts to do this thing on autopilot. And what happens is it encourages your brain to think less. So you're not thinking about it. So like when I felt like there was some force above me that was causing me to go walk into the gas station to get alcohol every time I got gas, which, you know, kind of ironic since it's the same ingredient. Not saying anything there, don't try that, that's really silly. But at any rate, right, we look at this and we say, okay, well, what was the force? Well, the force was the force of habit and the desire to get rid of the withdrawal symptoms. Another one here is she talks about how we've become accustomed and believe that it's normal to feel the way that we feel with the withdrawal symptoms, right? On page 66, she's like, okay, we have kind of become ingrained to the fact that these are normal. Like I thought it was normal to feel like garbage every single morning. I thought that was normal. Maybe it's because I'm not eating, maybe it's because of this, or maybe whatever. But the fact of the matter is it was the withdrawal symptoms that were created by the alcohol. She goes on in an interesting thing on page 67. She says, in truth, you don't need alcohol to enjoy life or relieve stress. You only think you do, right? And we look at this and we're like, do we really need this? Because right now, your body might be feeling like you really need this, right? I gotta have it. I remember with me, I thought that I had to have it. It was like water. It was like air. It was like my life force. But the fact of the matter is I only thought I did because of these withdrawal symptoms, because of social conditioning, because of all the stuff the advertisers have told me about alcohol. Literally, this has been ingrained. So what she's trying to do here, or what I believe she's trying to do, is get us to see the bigger picture and see what's going on. And going on with the way that we feel, she says in page 73 that dehydration from drinking can actually shrink your brain and its ability to function. And what's happening is every time we're drinking, we're actually shrinking our brain and the ability to function. So our coping mechanisms, our learning how to cope and our learning how to live in this world has been skewed, right? It's been shrunk down, and the ability to actually use these things is even worse than before, which wasn't good in the first place if you're anything like me. And she goes on to say in page 96, in reality, your staunch belief that advertising does not influence you. So you might be watching this saying, Marcus, you know, I don't really agree with Ann because I'm smarter than advertising. I know what the advertisers are up to. But there's a school of thought and a therapy model called NLP that says that it actually works better when you're looking for it, right? And much like that, in advertising, it works better, it's more effective to the people who think they're above it, right? Because what's happening is it's getting in your brain over and over. You see those pictures of happy lives, fancy cars, women, men, whatever it is, and they get into your brain and boom, they flash that picture of alcohol and your brain links it. It says, man, all those guys have alcohol and they're buff and they have the drink, so I must need the drink, and happiness and everything starts to get linked to it. On top of that, you also have your own beliefs that you've proved to yourself from the very, very few benefits that alcohol gives you, like being able to shut off anxiety or being able to shut off a racing mind or be able to function in public or whatever it is. And the problem is that all these things are piled up, and again, you're 4 times removed from actual reality. You're not experiencing it anymore. Now, she goes on in page 98 to say that generally with alcohol and any substance, the more that we consume, the more we desire. Right now, this goes kind of important, and one of the things that I learned about staying sober is that when you give in, right? So a lot of people say, oh, well, when I have relapse, I go all out, right? We don't know what's going to happen when someone relapses, and everyone's walking around terrified of what's going to happen when they relapse or when they go back out or whatever you want to call it. And the reason they're afraid of this is because of the fact that when we whet our appetite, when we try something a little, chances are your brain's going to want it more and more, especially if your mind has been sleeping for a while and you've been in recovery and you go out and you have that taste, all those areas of your brain are going to start to light up again and all the cravings are going to come back, and one sip is going to make you want to desire more, right? It's not so much a recovery belief mindset thing as it is just a fact of life, right? It's a fact of life that, hey, look, you know what? When something happens, these trails of thought are going to happen, right? It's like your brain has these pathways, and these pathways go through, and sometimes they get lit up by certain things, right? You're driving down the road, and you hear a song, and boom, you start feeling things, and you know, all this stuff comes back to you, or you smell a perfume, or you smell something that reminds you of someone. And this is the way that our brain works through years and years and years of living to, or learning to live in the world, right? We'd say, well, you know, if you smell that, it's probably a tiger, you should probably be afraid. If you smell that, that means this, or if you hear that, or if you see that. And what's happening is our brains are looking for patterns, right? It's trying to find patterns to help you survive. And somewhere along the way, your brain got hijacked by alcohol, and it created patterns that are actually self-defeating, right? These patterns are self-defeating you. And she says in page 147, learning happens in the same part of the brain as addiction, right? When these scientists and these guys with fancy lab coats went in and started studying this stuff, they learned that learning is in the same place of your brain that addiction is. So addiction is a learned behavior. Of course, there's a lot more on top of it than that, with chemical dependency, psychology, your philosophy of life, your way of living, your belief system. All kinds of things are at play here. She goes on here in page 148. There we go. I had it folded down so I couldn't see it. But in page 148, she says, it would seem that we only undergo withdrawals when we quit, right? That's what you would think. You think, okay, well, I quit drinking and boom, I get alcohol, right? Like the withdrawal period where everyone stops. But in reality, this is one of my favorite parts of the books. In reality, every time we take the drug or drink, we experience withdrawal as it leaves our system. So as soon as you drink and you're done, or if you are a slow drinker, which I don't think any of us are, right? But as soon as it starts to leave your system, the second it starts to leave, which by definition is when you don't have it anymore, the withdrawal starts to happen. And this is the reason that we feel the need to take the drug again or drink again. We endure withdrawals constantly when we are repeatedly taking a drug or drinking alcohol. This is why you feel like garbage all the time. This is why you want to drink more, because of the fact that it's leaving your system and you don't want to feel that way, right? It's very important to look at, because a lot of this is a self-made cycle. And if we could help break the cycle and help get you out of it, I think that we can help you live a sober life. life. We endure withdrawals constantly when we're repeatedly taking a drug or drinking alcohol. If the cocaine addict never smoked crack, they would never suffer from the panic, the cold sweats, and the misery of a crack withdrawal. Isn't it clear that the drug creates rather than relieves the symptoms? Right? So is the very thing that you're taking, the very alcohol you're drinking, is it actually creating the symptom? Because I'll bet if anxiety is one of the reasons that you drink, or nervousness or racing thoughts is the reason you drink, I'm sure there was a time in your life that you were able to get along just fine without them. Right? I know for me I felt a little anxiety, but when I started drinking to relieve the anxiety, it actually made it worse, and it started causing a lot of these symptoms. And I think this is very eye-opening because this is something that's not really taught in a lot of recovery, right? They just say, well, you know, you need to stop drinking, you need to get rid of character defects, you need to follow this, and, you know, get a support group and everything like that, which is all good stuff. But I always like to know the more, and if you're watching my channel and you're subscribed, if you're not, you can subscribe now, but I think you're probably the same way as me. You want to understand what's going on. We can see this from the outside, right? We can see from the outside that, hey, look, you know, this person's not that bad off when they don't drink, but when they drink, all this stuff comes back tenfold, and, you know, it's like a big trap. On page 156, she says, the feeling of relief is a huge contributor to the illusion of happiness, right? So wanting to feel relief, which alcohol sort of provides, but it's debatable if it's real. But the feeling of the relief is a huge contributor to the illusion that alcohol is bringing you happiness or helping you. And I think at this point, you're probably way past alcohol's bringing me happiness, which is why you're watching this video. Unless you just like to watch me talk, which for some reason, there are a few people out there that like that. That's cool. Right? To each his own. According to research, Johann Hari says that social activities can help prevent addiction. A lot of people really look at the idea of 12-step groups and meetings and alcohol recovery groups and things like that as paramount to an addict's success in recovery because of the fact that there's a social element that's missing. I kind of believe this is true. It makes sense to me because our culture really struggles with getting together and being honest and being open, and oftentimes these groups provide that, where a lot of people are working towards a common goal. Here's another one, 165. She says, social cues strongly influence your unconscious mind. Right? We look at this, and from the time we're born, social cues are what we're looking for, right? We do something funny as a baby, mom laughs, and we do it again because that social cue says, hey, that was funny, you are liked, or whatever it says to the baby brain in baby language. And the same thing happens, right? We look at things and it's like alcohol is socially acceptable and cool and whatever, when in actuality it's really not. And in actuality, you could get along just fine without it, even though your brain thinks that you can't, and even though you think that the world's going to end if you stop drinking and you're going to be ostracized from life, which these are the things that I thought, right? Let's get real about this. Let's get honest about it and talk about these things, because they are things we struggle with. There's the correction. Between 72 and 240 between 72 and 240 hours is how long it takes for the alcohol to actually leave your system. Here's another one. She says on page 187, anyone who feels fear at the thought of never drinking again, which is what we just talked about, is already emotionally dependent. Right? Are you emotionally dependent because you are worrying about what your life's going to be like without alcohol for the rest of your life? Does that thought scare you? Right? Are you sitting here saying, man, the rest of my life? What am I going to do? I mean, seriously? What about, like, my kid's wedding, or you know, a toast, or what if I get promoted, or what about 20 years down the road if I want to drink? The fact that you're thinking that usually means that you're emotionally dependent on that. And you want to take a look at that, right? What is it in our society that makes us have to drink long after we are alcoholics, or long after we have these things, right? And what she says in page 202 is that surely We should focus on arresting alcohol abuse well before the disease has progressed into full-blown alcoholism and begins ruining lives. Now, this book is good. I really like it. I like the perspective. Very recommended reading. However, with everything that you read in alcohol recovery, you want to take what works for you and leave the rest, right? This book was clearly intended on reaching people who are not that far gone, right? In this part here in the beginning, she says, you know, we're not looking for the guy that's in the street that needs help and can't tie his shoe because he needs to drink, right? We're not looking for that guy. We're not looking for the guy like Marcus that was ready to end it all because of alcohol and didn't see a way out and couldn't stop no matter what. Even when other people tried to help him, even when he went to 12-step readings, nothing seemed to work, right? And that's not what this book is written for. However, it is good, and I think you get a lot of benefit out of it. But if you're the type of person that's like me and you say, you know what, I can't stop, then what you want to do is you want to look for help. You want to get some kind of doctor, right? Because that time of withdrawal, that time of detoxing is very, very dangerous. And you want to start to look at things and you want to start to learn how to live your life in a different way. And that's one of the things I was a little let down by. I would have liked to see a lot more of the learning aspect, a lot more of the, you know, here's how to stay sober. A lot more of the alcohol is a learning problem, and here's how to unlearn it. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this on this and other videos, and we're going to talk about what it takes for you to get sober. On this channel, if you like these videos, make sure that you subscribe. What I'm going to do is go through a book each week in addition to our regular videos and our live casts, and we're going to talk about some of those skills that you can learn, some of the skills you might not have to be able to learn to cope and be able to do this stuff. And it's not like you have to go tell a complete stranger all your dirty business and everything like that, which I believe, you know, sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's not, but if that's what's, you know, frightening you, don't worry, there's other ways at looking at this. And what I want to talk to you about is the fact that you can remain sober. If you would have told me 3 years ago that today I'd be sitting here sober, I wouldn't have believed you in a million years. I wanted sobriety to help my life be better. I didn't realize that there was so much going on behind the surface that wasn't the only problem. And what I want to do is I want to share my experience with you and give you the hope that you can stop drinking. So, thanks again for watching this video. I hope you had fun watching it, as much fun as I did making it. Hope you enjoy the book. Pick it up. We're going to take a look at some others. Feel free to put your comments, and if you have any book recommendations for books on sobriety or mental health or anything like that, post them in the boxes below. I'm going to do books on self-help, books on alcoholism, books on addiction. We're going to do some books on philosophy, belief systems, racing thoughts, everything, you name it. Anxiety will be a big one as well. So, subscribe, put your comment below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks again, I'm Marcus, and until next time, stay sober, and let's have fun living one day at a time.